message with us for today. The Torah portion is a double portion. It's matot matzeh, and sometimes because of the calendar, there are two things that are brought together. And I'm going to take from the context of this particular Torah reading and try and figure out how to bring it into our own lives. Now, that's always what we try and do. And I really believe the longer that I do this with you, the more I truly believe that as important as our commentators are, as significant as it is to dig down into these ancient texts, and as much as I admire and enjoy and am inspired by those teachers, we have to find a way to bring their voices into our lives, to bring their voices into our realities. At the end of the book of Numbers, this is the very, very end of the whole book. At the end of the book of Numbers, before we reach Deuteronomy, in chapter 35, we see that there's an allotment of land that's finally given to the 12 tribes of Israel. And the Levites aren't exactly a tribe. They are servants that are going to be dealing with the tabernacle, and some of them are priests, but they're not one of the 12 tribes, and they don't get their own allotment of land. But they do receive a smaller type of land, a permanent residence for themselves, and they're spread throughout 48 towns because they're going to be serving as leaders for all of the other tribes. So in their 48 towns, some of them are going to be designated, 6 of them actually, as cities of refuge. A city of refuge. There were 6 places in the land of Israel that were safe havens, but not for anybody and under all circumstances. A city of refuge in the Torah is a place where one would flee to if you accidentally murdered somebody, not intentionally, accidentally. It was a homicide. Perhaps it was an accident, perhaps it was negligence, but it was not intentional. And so while you have to be held accountable for your actions, there was also an idea that you can find safety in one of these 6 cities. Because in the ancient world, including in the Torah, if one spills blood and pollutes the earth, that's what spilling blood does. The way to restore the balance to the world was for that person's blood to be spilled too. It's a very ancient idea, and it's certainly not something we are particularly fond of or look at saying this is something that is so, a meaningful act of Torah. This was a reality. But in order to have your life be spared, you would have to get to, as quickly as you can, with your family, one of these 6 cities of refuge. So again, it's not about intentional murder. If it was intentional murder, the city wouldn't save you. But it is a home base. Folks would have to stay there for the rest of their lives or until the high priest of all of Israel dies. And his death would be on some level a symbolic way of atonement for all of Israel. And so those that were held in the city would be able to leave again. There's a rabbi who died maybe 15 years ago. His name is Levi Meir. He was a prominent teacher. He was a chaplain in hospitals, and he was a psychologist. And he talked about a parallel between the designation of a city of refuge with the building of God's sanctuary in the center of the people. The most significant aspect of a city of refuge, he said, was that there was, in every meaning of the word, a sanctuary. A sanctuary is, of course, a place of protection. A sanctuary is a temple of God, and it's designed and built according to God's instructions, and it's cared for by all of the priests, but this was a place that was going to be safe. Whenever I make a teaching on a city of refuge, I always have the same thought. the very first thing I think of is the episode of MASH, My Other Torah. And in that episode of MASH, Father Mulcahy wants to get the mess hall to be recognized as sanctuary for somebody that just feels like he can't go back to the front, and he runs away. Of course it's illegal, and he pleads and pleads and pleads to make their dining hall, their mess hall, a sanctuary. As a young kid watching the show, I realized that my synagogue sanctuary was actually supposed to be a place of protection, just the way Father Mulcahy in MASH wanted to do for that young man. The person who runs away in the Torah, looking for a place to live, not to hide, is being held accountable. His actions have consequences, but there's more to it. There's another chaplain, and I'm purposefully looking at chaplains. There's another chaplain, Rabbi Neil Joseph Lovinger, a chaplain in upstate New York. He writes, what makes the lesson of the Cities of Refuge so powerful is that accidental manslaughter is an extreme case. If someone who killed is not rejected by God, but can in fact still find empathy and safety and the possibility of reconnection to a wider Jewish community, how much more does that apply to the everyday mistakes that we all make? Nothing puts us beyond the reach of the divine. Going back to the first teacher, Levi Meir, he said, no matter who you are and what you've done, God doesn't abandon you. God doesn't abandon you. And I think for so many in our community, we feel that either God isn't real or we're in this fight. We are exiled or estranged from God, or we do feel that God abandons us. And this text is trying to say again and again and again, God doesn't abandon you ever. I think the abandoning comes from us. I do. I think we forget to show up for each other. If this teaching about God not abandoning us even at our hardest times, if this teaching is about God not disappearing on someone who's living with internal struggle and conflict, then we cannot disappear either, because, like I shared on the screen earlier, we're supposed to be like God. We're supposed to act like God. We're supposed to walk in God's ways. So how do we respond to all of this? I think we build a better sanctuary. And I'm not talking about the one on Baseline Road. And I know that many of us are yearning about that sanctuary, but I would actually say we can have sanctuary even here in this virtual service. We can provide sanctuary for one another. Last night, we had Brian Teinselman, a former youth director, talk to us. He's a Jewish man. He's an African-American man. And he was talking about how Jews of color respond in synagogue and Jewish spaces, and how in their own communities, they don't always feel safe. So they don't come. It's not like they aren't around, they are. But maybe it makes us feel a little bit better to think that there aren't so many, and that's why they're not in our synagogue. The truth is, intrusive questions or assumptions or his feeling of needing to prove his Jewish credentials gets so tiresome, it doesn't feel like a sanctuary. There are other people who haven't felt safe in houses of worship. Plenty of folks in the LGBTQ plus community who have been judged and maligned, and where people say this is what God expects, have been so misunderstood or unaccepted, also don't feel safe, and that our space can provide sanctuary. There are folks with mental health challenges, individuals with special needs. We need sanctuary in our lives, not just because there are some who have felt othered, but because all of us have felt othered at some point. whether it's a minority as a Jew in a larger world, or because we're stuck at home where other people aren't taking responsibility and loving thy neighbor and putting on a mask. How is it that we get to provide sanctuary when we live alone and COVID-19 makes us feel isolated? How do we provide sanctuary when we lose loved ones and can't be embraced, can't even join with others in mourning across the country? Even the Daily Camera just the other day announced that the Boulder City Council is going to look at faith communities again to provide emergency sheltering instead of providing real resources for sheltering of homeless individuals. They are abandoning the most vulnerable among us in one of the most affluent communities in the world. And they're asking the faith community to help because there's not enough will to provide sanctuary for those who need it. I suspect that our congregation and others like us of all faiths are going to find hard times about our relevance unless we reclaim that value of sanctuary. Not the facility, but the center of community where we will find return and strength and comfort and kindness, where we will be embraced physically or virtually, where we will open our doors when no others will. Sanctuary's got to be our safe place. When injustice looms and when tears fall, sanctuary is a place that's going to bring us together. But it needs not only to be built, it's got to be maintained. It needs to be invested in. And I'm not talking only about money. It needs the spiritual capital of love and devotion and faith and kindness and hope. We're all feeling injured watching the news, and we are angry that we are feeling so vulnerable. We are embarrassed that we didn't know how to do more to support people of color earlier. We are tired of seeing anti-Semitism continue amongst celebrities, people with real influence where millions are following them. We're concerned about all of these other issues that seem to be put on a back burner because of one crisis after another, whether it's housing or healthcare or food insecurity or safety and equity and respect in the workplace and in the synagogue for women, whatever the issues are. However you and I might feel, I am making a plea to build sanctuary. If a city of refuge is going to provide a safe space for people who made awful mistakes, then perhaps we can help make our congregation a city of refuge, a safe place and a safe space, a place where our homecomings are celebrated, our presence is going to be valued, our work is going to be appreciated and sanctified, and our journeys are going to be compelling, where our tears are going to be lifted, our dreams are going to be shared with uplift, and we get to bring healing to broken pieces of our lives and our world. I hope to make sanctuary here with you for the unhoused, but also just for you and me. We need it. Let's not forget it. And let's not leave it for somebody else's work. Let's move to the conclusion.